And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by offering a very warm welcome to our attendees across the world. Thank you for taking the time to be here for this live showdown. Today, we're going to be putting our flagship data integration solution, Astera Centerprise, to the test in a live demonstration that shows off the full extent of its ETL and ELT capabilities. Before we begin, let me take a moment to introduce myself and the other hosts for this webinar. My name is Adnan Sami Khan, and I handle product documentation here at Astera, which means that I help to put together and publish many of the white papers, blogs, and support articles you can find on our website. Joining me today will be our senior software engineer, Hamza Khatri. Hamza oversees front-end and back-end development across our product range and has played an instrumental role in many of our newer functionalities, including our revamped ELT mode, which we'll be showing off today. Our CEO, Ibrahim Surani, will also be here to answer your ETL versus ELT questions at the end of the webinar. Now, before we dive into the topic at hand, there's a little bit of housekeeping that we need to get out of the way. So first, this conversation is being recorded and the footage will be made available on BrightTalk as well as on our website at astera.com. So if you miss anything, you can always go back and catch it again later. Second, while we will be looking to cover these data integration techniques in as much depth as possible during this webinar, I'm sure many of you will have questions of your own as well. Just make sure to type them into the chat box, and Ibrahim will make sure to get as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation. So we've got that out of the way. Let's go ahead and dive into the topic. Now, in order to properly explain the concept behind this challenge, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how effectiveness is defined from a data integration perspective. The first thing we'll talk about here is variety. Now, in today's data-driven environment, organizations deal with a staggering variety of platforms and data types. On any given day, you may receive sales data from a CRM, stock and delivery data from your ERP, real-time transactional information from frontline systems, as well as structured reports from various other departments. So your users need to be able to extract data from each of these sources and then convert them into a standardized format that is suitable for higher level analysis. The second thing we'll talk about is data quality. Now, this is a hot button issue in today's business environment and it encompasses 5 key aspects. The first is completeness. That means making sure that there are no gaps in the data you present to end users. Second is consistency, which means ensuring that data arrives in a standardized format that can be easily understood by the receiver. Third up, we've got accuracy. Accurate data should be relevant, free of material errors, and it should faithfully represent the activities it relates to. The fourth is validity. So that's a process for delivering data, and it should be efficient and repeatable. Most likely, you'll want some automation involved there. Finally, we've got timeliness. Data needs to be received within an expected time frame in order to be useful to the end user. Now, I know some people say that data ages like fine wine, but it really depends on who's receiving it and what it's being used for. So I think these are all basic definitions that all of us can agree on, but of course, creating this sort of value on a consistent basis is no easy task, and we'll find out a little bit more about that later on. The third metric we're going to talk about is velocity. Listen, it's no secret that data is coming in at a rapid rate across your enterprise. But it's not just the speed of arrival that's cause for concern. You also have to think about how quickly you're able to process that data so that it's available for use. Otherwise, your intelligence may become a lot less effective to decision makers across your organization. Last but not least, let's tackle volume, which is generally the elephant in the room when it comes to these discussions. In their annual Digital Universe report, IDC reported that the amount of information stored in enterprise IT systems is doubling every year. In general, the only way to deal with that kind of upscaling is to create an architecture that provides adequate storage and processing for both your current and future needs. Of course, building that kind of scalable infrastructure does not come cheap. So on a practical level, most organizations are trying to find the right balance between performance and cost when it comes to their data pipelines. So these are the 4 main judging criteria for our ETL versus ELT showdown. Whichever one of these techniques manages to deliver on our objectives in the most effective way will come out on top. But the use cases to follow will show that there's a fine line between winning or losing when it comes to data integration. So with that brief introduction out of the way, I think this is a perfect spot to segue into our first poll question of this webinar, which is, which aspect of data integration does your organization struggle with the most? And we have 4 options here for you to choose from. The first is vast variety of sources and destinations, high volume of data, poor data quality, or the velocity of data. So you have 4 choices up there. I'm going to give a couple of minutes for you guys to send in your answers to that poll question, and we'll see what kind of replies we get. All right, so far it seems like data quality and variety seem to be the 2 options that are coming to the forefront. And we'll just leave this up for about a second or 2 more, and we'll end it there. So yeah, about a 50-50 split there on variety and data quality. Okay, that really gives us an idea of what most of our users thinking. Okay, some last minute changes there, but okay, good results and a good response. I'm really happy with that. And we definitely got a much clearer idea of where our attendees are at when it comes to these aspects of data integration. All right, with that said, let me go ahead and move on to presenting our first challenger for this webinar, ETL. Now, ETL first came to prominence in the 1970s when enterprises began to integrate multiple repositories into their data architecture. This increasing disparity in storage and processing technology created a need for automated processes that would allow data to be extracted, transformed, and loaded into a centralized destination, usually a data warehouse. As the name implies, ETL takes data from one or multiple source systems, migrates it to a dedicated server for a variety of transformations can be applied to input data sets. The transformed data is then loaded into one or more destinations based on the user's requirements. Now, this 3-step procedure minimizes the impact of periodic ETL activity on both the source and target system. That's a basic description, which should be more than enough to satisfy anyone who's well-versed in this area. But let's go ahead and show off just how these attributes come together in a workable use case so that you can see the benefits of ETL in action. Hamza, whenever you're ready, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you, Adnan, and good morning, everyone. I'm just going to move to the Centerprise screen right now. So what you see in front of you is Astera Centerprise Data Flow Designer screen. And to the left here, you've got a toolbox with a range of drag and drop objects, including source and destination connectors, as well as dozens of transformations from simple sorts and aggregates to advanced parsing like data cleansing and function building tools. So let's say your organization receives data in a couple of different formats. An Excel sheet containing information on customers from your marketing department and transactional data on new orders coming from your sales department in a delimited file. So I'm just going to create a new data flow over here. And first of all, we'll need an Excel workbook source. So I'm just going to drag it from the toolbox to the designer screen. And once I go into the properties, I can provide the file path that contains the data. So here I'm just going to provide the file path. And once I click OK, it's going to pick up the layout from the source file, and we can use that layout to our advantage. Next up, we have a delimited file source that's coming from our sales department. And once again, if I go into the properties, I can provide it a file path. And once again, it will pick up the layout from the source file, and we can use that for our mapping. Next up, what we need is a file lookup. So we have one file that contains email addresses against each of the customer IDs. So I'm going to search for lookup. And we have a couple of different lookups, but we'll need a file lookup object. So I'm just going to drag it out to the designer screen. Once again, I'm going to go into the properties. And here I need to provide the type of file that I'm providing, in this case, Excel. Click Next. And we can paste the file path in here. And again, I clicked OK, and it picked up the layout from the source file. And now what I can do is map the customer ID to the file lookup so it can give us the email address for that corresponding ID. So I'm not going to bore you with the complete build, but you get the gist of it. You just drag out a object from the toolbox to the designer screen. You provide it the properties or the file path that it requires, and then you can just map your data to the next action. So I'm going to move to the completed data flow over here. I'm just going to zoom in. So you can see how we join both data sets in a hierarchical format so that we can clearly analyze the relationship between customers and their orders. So here we have customer, and under that we have orders for each of those customers. With that done, we parse the contact name string into first name and last name with this object over here so that they are aligned with our destination layout, which again goes back to the concept of consistency. We also wanted to make sure that our end users had all the necessary facts at hand for the data analysis. So we added a couple of different expressions here in hierarchical transformation. So let's just go ahead inside of that. So we've added a couple of different fields that weren't inside of the original layout. So first of all, we have count of orders for the customer. And here we have a simple expression. I've added a simple expression that tells us how many orders that customer has. Secondly, we have a status of orders inside of the order. So this expression, what it does is it takes out the difference between the required date and the ship date, just to tell us if the order was delayed or on time. I'm just going to move over here. And finally, we applied a data quality rule transformation to ensure all the email addresses show up in proper format. So if you go inside of that, you can see there's a simple expression that checks the @ symbol inside of the email address to validate if it's a valid email address or not. And those errors were written inside of a record level log for further analysis. And the rest of the data is written inside of an XML destination that matches our hierarchical layout. Now let's just go ahead and run this data flow and see how our ETL engine handles those complex transformation, disparate sources, and destinations. So we're just going to click the Start Data Flow button over here. And it's going to run the data flow and show us the progress in this window here. As you can see, we have a full output without any issues. These 5 errors were because of the data quality rule we provided, and some of the email addresses weren't satisfying that condition. And there we have it. This is a complete end-to-end ETL process that provides complete, consistent, accurate, and valid data.
Awesome. So Hamza, I think it's safe to say that this is pretty much a tailor-made use case for ETL. Basically, if you're looking to perform any kind of advanced enhancements or transformations on your data, or you're dealing with a variety of sources and destinations, then there really isn't a better option than traditional data integration. But just to make sure, let's take a look at our second challenger for this webinar, ELT. So over the past decade, ETL engines have been tasked with transforming and loading ever larger volumes of data. As a result, we've seen a number of organizations struggle to execute their data flow pipelines within reasonable timeframes. At the same time, we've also seen RDBMS architectures such as MySQL, Oracle, and SQL Server grow increasingly powerful. Many of these platforms now also employ MPP to support enhanced performance and efficiency. Now, these two trends came together to give birth to extract, load, transform. Unlike the traditional 3-stage extract, transform, load ETL process, ELT does not require data to be processed through a centralized staging server before it's dispatched to its destination. Instead, ELT leverages the inherent computing capacity of a high-performance RDBMS that performs some or all of the data processing functions that were previously offloaded to the ETL engine. In Centerprise's ELT mode, all relevant data is loaded directly into these systems, and the necessary transformations are applied to either the source or target in the form of a single SQL query. As a result, ELT is perfectly optimized to process large data sets in a resource-efficient manner. But this technique does carry a few caveats. First, ELT can only be performed if there is a database at source or target. Second, while modern databases can perform a number of transformations, including filters, lookups, and aggregations, arguably even more efficiently than ETL engines, some of the more complex operations, such as data cleansing or advanced parsing, cannot be pushed down to these systems. Finally, ELT only works when source and target databases are located on the same server. So that's the theory behind the topic, but I'm going to hand things over to Hamza now so he can show off just how these different factors affect your choice of data integration in practice. Hamza, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks, Adnan. Okay, so I just want to briefly go over to our original ETL data flow so I can show off some of the features of our ELT mode. So we have a button here, that verify pushdown button, which allows us to see errors and other potential issues that might stop our data flow from running optimally. In other words, you don't have to wait for your data flow to complete in order to start troubleshooting. Click the option now. And you see this warning. So immediately we know that this data flow is unsuitable for ELT. And that is because we are using Excel and delimited files instead of database sources. Now that's no good for us because we're looking to compare two techniques. So let's just go ahead and switch to a more suitable example, which I have opened up right here. Right, this is pretty much a prime use case for ELT. I'm just going to zoom in here and move over to our destination. So in this scenario, we are populating a sales fact table in a data warehouse architecture. Fact tables consist of measurements and business keys drawn from different parts of a business, in this case, the sales process. Now, whenever the context for a particular fact needs to be retrieved, these business keys are matched against the related surrogate keys in the dimension tables. For that, we need to apply lookups. In this case, we've got 5 separate database lookups running to feed in surrogate keys from a location table, a customer table, a sales employees table, a stock item table, and finally a supplier table. As you can see, fact table requires multiple joins between dimension tables. If I move over just to the left, you can see there are multiple joins. And the more joins you have, the more calculation your ETL engine has to perform. Add in about 3.5 million records, which is pretty much moderate size for any enterprise data warehouse fact table. And the high cost of performing this operation is clear. Of course, in the entire process will also need to be repeated on an ongoing basis because your transactional data is always being updated. Each time the fact table is populated, the lookup transformation will also need to cross-reference every business key against the relevant dimension database lookup table and convert it into a surrogate key. If the dimension table is particularly large or several changes have been made to the source records, the lookup can become particularly time-consuming and resource-intensive. To make things even more challenging, we've added a couple of additional transformations to the flow to ensure completeness of data and the destination repositories. So I'll just move it over here. Specifically, we took the stock item table, applied a couple of aggregates to get minimum and maximum values for various fields, as well as the count of stock item quantities right here. And we joined these outputs and delivered them to a separate database for analysis, which is in the end to the right here. Now, to allow for the most accurate comparison, I'm going to go ahead and execute this data flow in both ETL and ELT. So let's just go ahead and run it in our pushdown mode, that is our ELT mode. And you'll be able to see the job progress over here. While this runs, I do want to stress that there's nothing unique about this data flow. In fact, if you're currently working in a mid to large size organization, then you're probably dealing with far more complex use cases on a daily basis. So we'll just wait for the data flow to complete over here. So the job executed in about 57 seconds, and that was about 3.5 million records through the data flow. So if you're wondering how all of the queries are being generated in the database, then you can check out the related SQL statements in the job progress pane right here. So if we open this up, you can see how all of our joins, aggregates, and lookups have been converted and translated into database native SQL. So now we're going to run it in ETL mode. And while we're waiting for that to complete, let's just take you through an additional push-down optimization feature we've recently introduced to allow users more control over the data flow execution. In Centerprise 8.0, you can select any action in a data flow and choose not to push it down with this exclude pushdown command. So if I right-click over here, right here. This option is useful in situations where our ETL engine executes a transformation differently to how it would be performed inside of the database. For example, sort transformations are some of the most expensive transformations in any data flow. If you have multiple sorts occurring across your pipeline, then you will add significantly to your job runtime. So if you'd rather not lock your source database for minutes at a time, then you might prefer to run your sort in ETL mode instead. So if I go inside of this aggregate, you can see that we've checked the sort incoming datasets option for both of these aggregate transformations. So we're going to go ahead and exclude them from pushdown and rerun the data flow. So we can just check this option. And as you see, it's checked. And I'm not going to run this data flow again because we already ran it. And I'm just going to show you the job trace that it's created. And you can already see that it showed that these two actions were excluded from pushdown. And if you go inside of the SQL that it generated, so if we open this up, the SQL that it generated, we have a select statement and multiple left outer joins, but no sorts. So, all right, that's been about 5 minutes. So let's take a look at our ETL flow and see how that's going. We haven't got an output, and it still has a lot of operations to go. So it looks like we have. So I think I'm going to go ahead, save you guys the suspense, and switch to a completed version of this data flow that we executed earlier in ETL. So we have a job right here. And if you see the duration, it took about 45 minutes for this data flow to complete in ETL mode. So obviously, when it comes to running high volume, high velocity data flows from database to database, ELT is a clear winner. Adnan, I'll leave it up to you to give us your takeaways on these results.
Thank you, Hamza. Again, lots of food for thought there. I'm sure that very clearly illustrated the differences between ELT and ETL, and the sort of use cases where one is more applicable than the other. So I think the biggest takeaway here is that neither ETL nor ELT are one-size-fits-all solutions for your data integration needs. In case you're deciding which approach to use for your reporting and analytics, you have to look at the sources and destinations you're dealing with, the kind of transformations required, as well as the time frames required for delivery of that data. In general, though, there are a few best practices that can help guide your choice between ETL and ELT. First of all, if you're dealing with a variety of data types and diverse sources and destinations, then ETL is the preferable option. If you're migrating data across servers, then ETL is generally going to be the preferable solution. Now, I know we said that ELT generally only works when it's between the same server, but you can run partial ELT jobs between servers. ETL is still going to be your preferable option in those circumstances. Third, if you have strict data governance in place, and data governance is another hot button issue nowadays, then it may be desirable to move your source data to an ETL engine for filtering and cleansing before migration to a consolidated repository. If you need to perform complex transformations, then ETL is generally going to be the better choice. If you're dealing with smaller volumes of data that are loaded on a periodic basis, then ETL can remain your go-to. If your databases are used for transactional purposes and you don't want to risk locking them during normal operations, then you're probably still better off performing expensive operations through the ETL engine. On the other hand, if data velocity is a concern, then ELT should be your choice because data will be transformed and loaded at the same time, which will maximize your throughput rates. If you're processing large volumes of data within the same data server, then ELT will provide far superior performance. Block-level transformations such as sorts and aggregates require data to be extracted from source and loaded into a temporary cache on the ETL server before any calculations can be performed. This adds to the overall runtime of your data flow. As a result, you're better off performing these operations in the source database using our pushdown optimization mode. Finally, if your data requirements exceed your current storage and processing infrastructure, then you're better off building your data flow pipelines on ELT. But at the end of the day, you may be best served by adopting an ETLT approach in which you can pick and choose exactly how your data flows are executed. With Astera Centerprise's hybrid platform, you can pivot seamlessly between both of these data integration methodologies based on your use case and objectives. So you've seen the use cases, you've heard the theory. At this point, I'm going to throw it over to you and ask the second and final question of our webinar, which is, which data integration technique best suits your organization's data architecture? So we've got 3 options available for you here: ETL, ELT, or ETLT. So again, I'm going to give about a minute, a little bit more, for you guys to offer your answers to this question, and we'll see what everyone is saying. It's a 50-50 split on ELT and ETL so far. Okay, ETL seems to have pulled out ahead. Traditional data integration methodologies seem to be pulling out into the lead. I'm going to give it about 3 seconds more, and we'll go ahead and stop voting there and just give everything a second to settle down. But it seems that at least as far as the attendees go, ETL seems to have pulled out as a clear winner. Now, what about our verdict? So I know most showdowns tend to end in a victor-takes-all scenario, but in this case, I think we've clearly proven that we can judge this contest as a draw. With that said, I'm sure that we've got a deluge of questions coming in from viewers, so I'm going to go ahead and open the floor up now so that you can have your say. Ibrahim is standing by to tackle your queries, so we're going to go ahead and move to the question and answer session now. I will be taking questions and forwarding them to Ibrahim to answer live. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. Okay, so Ibrahim, if you're ready, we've got a first question here. Is ELT a replacement for ETL in all case scenarios? I know we've sort of answered this in this webinar, but if I could get your take on this.
No, it's not. There are times when ETL is the best answer, especially in the cases where the source and targets are in far-flung places, as well as when the data is more complex than flat files or flat structures. But when you are dealing with data that is moving between databases, whether on the same server or different server, partial or full ELT can bring about 10, maybe even 100 times performance improvements, because by reducing the amount of data that is moved back and forth between ETL server and the database.
Okay, got another question here. Is there any difference between pushing down your transformations to the source or destination in terms of performance?
Well, it's not one or the other. It can be both. For example, if you are extracting data from multiple tables, then on the source side, then what we will do is we will push down the joins on the source side. Now, let's say that you are populating a data warehouse and you are gathering data from multiple tables on the source side, and then once you reach the target side, you are going to do a whole bunch of dimension lookups before you put data in. So in that case, you can perform a kind of a hybrid approach where the data is, the joins are pushed down on the source side to create a unified query, and then on the target side, we can load them into a staging table and then perform all the dimension lookups as ELT. That can bring about major performance boost in case of loading a dimensional warehouse, for example.
Okay, we have another question coming in here. Don't you think ELT usage is limited to database server, whereas I think he says ELT here, but I think he means ETL has a lot of flexibility, any file to any file or database to any format?
Correct. That is correct. That is why you need both. Sometimes you need that flexibility often you need that flexibility, and sometimes you need the performance of the ELT. Our approach is that neither of those approaches is sufficient. You need one in some cases, you need the other in other cases. So we have provided a tool where you can decide at a flow level and even within a flow level what approach to take towards moving your data between different sources. So yes, there is no one size fits all here, as Adnan mentioned. It is basically depending on the need and the situation and the architecture that you have, you will need one or the other, at various times.
Perfect. All right. So just a couple more questions that we're going to answer here. So if I'm dealing with unstructured data, what would be the preferred method of data integration?
So if you're dealing with unstructured data, there are multiple parts to it. There is the extraction of data. Let's say you're extracting data from PDFs or you're extracting them from multiple different sources. In that case, the ETL approach and our data extraction approach is what you need to be able to get data out. Once the data is out, then maybe you are doing a lot of cleansing and transformations, in which case your ETL is still your best friend. Or maybe you're just moving data and doing some simple lookups or dimension lookups, in which case an ELT approach on the target side could be of use to you. So the idea is our goal was to give you a unified tool in which you can do these experiments and then decide on an approach that fits each of the use case that you're dealing with.
Okay, let's go with our penultimate question, because we do need to get out of here. Which databases does Centerprise support in ELT mode? What about cloud databases? So I think this is a question about the platforms you support currently and in the future.
We support most of the common databases for cloud and on-premise. We support Oracle in cloud as well as on-premise. Same for SQL Server. We support Postgres, we support Redshift, and we are constantly adding new connectors. We're just adding HANA and MariaDB next month. So that area is constantly expanding, and I think at this point we cover about 95% of the databases that are in the market.
Awesome. Perfect. Last question we'll go with is, what is the largest number of records that our platform can support in either ELT or ETL mode? Largest number of records.
There is no limit. I mean, we have customers that transfer 1 million records. We have customers that transfer 100 million records, and we have customers that work with billions of records. And the product works just fine with all of them. We have designed it to be highly scalable, and depending on the data volumes, you may need better hardware, you may need more parallel processors, but other than that, the product has no inherent limit.
Awesome. I think that pretty much gives us a well-rounded view of what our product can do, of ETL and ELT in our product, as well as a wider discussion that a lot of people in the industry are having between these two data integration methodologies. Now, I know that we might not have gotten to all of your questions, but we do have a bunch of resources available on the right there. You can click them. You can check out more information on the topic. Apart from that, you can view the recording of the webinar, and please do keep checking back on both our BrightTalk platform as well as on our website, because we're constantly updating with new webinars, new articles, new resources that will give you a much deeper look into this space where we're moving with data integration and new features and functionalities that we're constantly introducing, as Ibrahim just mentioned. Apart from that, thank you everybody so much. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. It was a great pleasure to have you here, and have a great day. Have a great day.